Good morning, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. I am really glad to have everybody here this morning. This is Justice Feldman, who is one of our other consultants that we've hired to help us in this racial justice conversation. Would you please give Justice and all of our panelists a round of applause and welcome? And Justice will get us kicked off.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this panel discussion, where we will talk about education and equity. You'll hear from professionals both in the secondary and post-secondary spaces, as well as the nonprofit space, who also partner with post-secondary and secondary institutions. We're very excited and very appreciative of all these panelists' time. Please give these panelists a round of applause. And panelists, I will pose a question to the broader panel, and whoever would like to answer may answer. Q&A will go till about 11:30 or so, and then we'll open up for questions to the audience. And panelists, if you could please introduce yourself as well as the organization you represent. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kristen Craig. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Interim Executive Director of Equity and Integration for Minneapolis Public Schools.
Good morning, all. My name is Sarah Hunter, and I have the privilege of working with Kristen in the Minneapolis Public Schools. I'm the Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, Assessment, and Accountability.
That's a lot. Yeah. I'm Jesse Mason. My pronouns are he, him. I'm Provost Vice President, Academic and Student Affairs at North Community College.
Good morning. My name is Donnie Brooks. I use he, his pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Athletics at McAllister College.
Good morning. My name is Carolyn Jones. I am the Director of the Black Men's Success Initiative with the Minnesota Private Colleges.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm from the Black Baptist tradition, so when I talk, you respond. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I am Stanley Brown, the Director of Equity and Inclusion for Hopkins Public Schools.
Talofa lava. My name is Leotawa Dr. John Peterson, and I am the CEO for TE2 Education Consulting, and I also work as a long-term consultant for the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership. Happy to be here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Appreciate you. And first question, and this is to anybody, of course, who wants to answer. What is your definition of equity and inclusion, and how do you apply it to your current role?
Can you hear me? Nope.
I guess I'll go ahead and start. The first question was the definition of equity
and inclusion. Yep.
And inclusion. And was there a second part to it?
Yeah, and how do you apply equity and inclusion to your current role?
So I'm an athletic director, so I'm just kind of, I'm very happy that you thought of me to sit in on this panel about education. Sometimes we don't think about athletics as a part of the educational process, but I look at my fields and my playing surfaces and courts as a laboratory, and our coaches are just educators. And I think when I think of equity and inclusion, and you'll hear me talk a lot about this because I frame things in terms of winning, losing, and competing a lot. And equity and inclusion, equity means to me is that do I provide my students, my teams, my coaches with the things that they need to be successful, to compete, and ultimately win. And not just the game, but we want them to win at the game of life. And do I give everyone what they need? So when I think about equity, I don't just want each team to have the same budget, right? That's not going to help you win, all right? But I need each team to uniquely have the things that will help them succeed and ultimately compete in the long term in the game of life. And then Inclusion for me is everybody has to play a part in it, and everybody has to feel like a part of that success.
And I sum it up as if I came into this room and gave everyone a pair of shoes, you would think that was a wonderful thing. I gave everyone a pair of shoes. Equity is giving everyone the correct size.
I'll build on what Dr. Brown just said. When you take it from the context of an institution like an educational system, which we've all come up through, everyone should have a pair of shoes in the right size, maybe if you're fortunate in the brand that you like, and if you're really fortunate, maybe in the color that you like. And so equity to me is about meeting people where they're at and knowing enough about them in relationship, true community, where you can get to know me and I can get to know you. And you can know that I can't run a marathon in a size 7 shoe because I wear a size 15 wide. I'm Samoan, right? I used these feet to climb up coconut trees back in the day, so my ancestors did. So my point being is giving people what they need from that perspective of the institution, meeting community where they're at.
I think adding to what most folks are saying, in our school context, I think about making sure that we're providing for the different communities the things that they need, and also listening to what those communities are saying that they need, instead of us as a school district saying, we know you need this, these are the standards that the state said, so you're just going to do these things, and that's it. We actually have to listen and think about their cultural traditions, how different folks exchange knowledge within their communities, and how we can use that and implement that in our practices in order for students to get that learning that is meaningful for them.
I would add too, so related to some of what Kristen shared, some of the methods that we use in Minneapolis Public Schools in order to work towards inclusion. I don't think we're not there, but we in our division use a form of evaluation called parent participatory evaluation, where we ask members of our Somali, Latino, Latinx, Southeast Asian, African American, and American Indian communities to go out into their own communities and gather representative information about what each of their communities need from our system that we aren't currently providing. And then we use the themes from that method of gathering of feedback from our community to hold our system accountable and to change the things that we do at the department and the district level. We're beginning to build that method of evaluation out into schools this year, so that in each individual school community, the groups that we have underserved are being asked and in fact, in this case, paid as staff members of Minneapolis Public Schools to gather feedback from their communities. So that's a step we're taking towards equity and inclusion, but it's a first step.
And I would say, as someone who's a provost and a member of the Minnesota state system, for me it's about parity. And empowerment until parity is no longer needed, especially for historically underrepresented and marginalized group. And that is in our processes, policies, and decision making.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. What are some measurable goals around equity and inclusion that your organization's focused on? And what are some examples that you could share?
Well, for us in Hopkins, one of our goals is to hire instructional staff that reflect the students. So we have been very active in hiring staff. We are in partnership with Metro State, and most student teachers are not paid when they student teach. And they have to take 12 weeks off from a job in order to student teach. That's a mighty big ask. So what we have done at Hopkins is we have taken 3 to 4 student teachers and have offered them, student teachers of color, and have offered them a stipend for the 12 weeks and preferential place and hire. And we have, this is our 4th year, and we have hired 6 from that pool. And so we are continuing that also, but it is a goal, and we are slowly moving towards it. Because you cannot become what you do not see. And if we want our scholars to become a teacher or become someone that instructs, they have to see themselves reflected.
I'd like to say for the program that I run, it's targeted specifically to Black male college students attending Minnesota private colleges. Our measurable goals are 4-year graduation and meaningful employment upon graduation, and we direct all our programming to be specifically toward those goals. These students all attend predominantly white campuses, and we trust and believe in what you had said earlier. They tell us what their needs are, and we adjust our programming. So, for example, to get a student to a 4-year graduation, these students don't know the path ahead of them. They're recruited to these colleges, and there's no one to help them, and they're on an environment where they feel alone, and they're, processing nonstop microaggressions. So we will do things like a student needs a tutor, we'll go find a Black male tutor for that student. A student needs to find a therapist who looks like them, we will go and find that therapist and support that student. We trust them, but we hold them accountable, and we have amazing 4-year graduation rates because of that. We believe in the students, we play upon their strengths instead of constantly telling them what they're not doing. And so, for example, we're in our 5th year of programming. The national 4-year graduation rate for Black men is 20%. Our programming is 70% and above because we are addressing their strengths, and we're supporting them in what they're telling us they need.
It's fantastic. Appreciate it. Third question is, how are some of the students and staff you are impacting thinking and feeling about equity and inclusion? What are some feedback you're hearing from students around the spaces of your diversity and inclusion initiatives?
That's a triggering question.
Yes. How are some students and staff you are impacting thinking and feeling about diversity and inclusion, your diversity and inclusion strategies?
Well,
I don't want to, I'm sorry.
well, you can go.
I don't want to hog a mic, but we just had this week a major conflict with some of our high school scholars, and it was an out-of-school conflict, and then it came into school and spread out into school, and it involved 6 young male Black scholars, and we don't suspend students because our belief is if there is a conflict, we need to restore the breach amongst students. And if you suspend, you send them home for 3 or 4 days. Maury's on TV, Jerry Springer's on TV, the whole 9 yards, nothing is done to restore the breach between humans. And so a lot of our instructional staff want students suspended. We won't do that. So we spent, because this was such an egregious conflict, all of us from the district office descended on our high school for support. And so Thursday and Friday, all day Thursday and all day Friday, was spent with these young male scholars and restorative circle conversations. And so the rub there is a number of teachers are very angst because these young scholars are coming back in the classroom and should have had some kind of punitive action. And we don't believe in punitive actions. And so, so that's that equity and inclusion rub there. And so they are coming back, and the conversations that these young scholars had amongst each other was very rich. They would have never had those conversations had they had someone to lead them through it. They would have just come back, crossed each other in the hallway, and perhaps something could have brewed up again. But the restorative part is the important.
And anytime you're doing equity and inclusion work, what you're doing is challenging the status quo. And that means change for a lot of people. Not only are you dealing with a pandemic, now we're furthering and applying what equity and inclusion means to serving students and serving the community, and bringing them a part of the solution and not only just listening and summarizing it. So of course, there are a lot of diversity of perspectives and opinions and fear about how does this change? I've invested 30 years in doing it this way, and now you're asking me to be more inclusive. And sometimes, just like anybody in groupthink, we spend so much time ruminating and overwhelmed, like what does mean culturally responsive mean? Now I gotta know what everybody's cultural background is. And you know, as I tell faculty and I tell staff, no, it's called respect. Excuse me. It's called respect. Respecting people and listening and responding appropriately, including them, including so that they see faces that look like them in everything that we do, and all of those things. And so there's a diversity of opinions and ideas, but I'm glad to say that at my institution, and especially with Minnesota Equity 2030 Plan, that we have much more interested individuals who are interested in developing and moving forward in their own equity and inclusion journey.
I'll also add briefly, in higher ed, we think we the smartest people in the world sometimes. And you want to get people real uncomfortable, say diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is the thing that is so hard to understand. And it's interesting, the better we do in creating a more diverse environment, the harder it becomes to make it more inclusive, because you just have more folks from different environments who have to now understand each other. And so I think what we found in these metrics is, as we make our place more diverse, that it then feels less inclusive and it takes more work. And you have to be committed to that work. You have to actually be willing to set out a game plan for your folks, I think, and also declare that that is your value, and decide that work is going to have to be done without some folks too. And I think that's what I'm seeing in our workforce. We're starting to see some people shift away as we're starting to declare these are our values. You either got to get on board, or this may not be the best place for you.
Also, very telling, appreciate it. How might some groups of students be experiencing school climate different than others, and what are some strategies that you focus on in creating a positive and equitable school climate?
I don't know if you all have noticed the state of our country lately when it comes to race relations, when it comes to transgender students, folks in the LGBTQIA plus community. But we have been experiencing for our students and all of us, a lot of folks feeling the pressures of the narratives that are being pushed in media. And we have a lot of students who aren't feeling safe in school. And when one person is not, when there's a group of people who are not feeling safe in school, it actually means that school is not safe for anybody. Because when we can sit and watch somebody else experiencing pain or hate or disenfranchisement, we are actually kind of putting something of ourselves away, right? We're having to hide a part of ourselves to be able to watch that and not say anything or do anything. So our culture and climate team in Minneapolis Public Schools has been working a lot to the point of using restorative practices. We've been partnering with the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis to provide some restorative practices among students in some of our high schools where there's been significant conflicts between groups. We have been working on having student voice through our youth participatory evaluation that Sarah's team works on. But overall, our students have been saying, like, school, the way we did it pre-pandemic, and trying to come back and do it the same again is not working. And we are having to figure out what we need to do to make school meaningful and safe for everyone that's there.
A layer of our youth participatory evaluation program that Kristen spoke about, so that's paired with the parent participatory evaluation program. One of the things that we've seen out of that is how important it is, and as a data person, this has always sort of been important to me, but how important disaggregation in our data is. So being honest as an institution about who we are serving and how well, and what each sort of subgroup of our student and caregiver community really feels about the services that we're providing. So I think one of the things that I was pulling up as I was preparing to come here this morning is just being honest with myself around, we have a climate survey every spring that has shown pre-pandemic that we had wildly different results in terms of, just a good example that I was looking at this morning, students' perception of their relationship with teachers, and then parents' perception of students' relationship with teachers, and then the teacher to teacher. So we give the same question for all three of those stakeholder groups each spring. And what I think we have found sort of Minnesota interesting is parents actually overestimate more than teachers do how positive their child's relationship is. And that has happened for us across all racial groups. So it's, I think, to Kristen's point, like the really listening to students, because our adults have like been a part of the muck that is our country for so much longer, that I think something that's important to me is to make sure that we're like centering students, but then like the next step would be centering our students who we have historically underserved, because they're telling us, they're being honest with us if we're willing to listen.
I think there is an overemphasis on the collection and analysis of quantitative data. And so when we look at, say, scientific enlightenment ways of measuring the human experience of going to school, we are drowning in quantitative data. And so where I've seen it work well is when you pair that quantitative data on an equal footing with qualitatively collected and analyzed data. And then you link that to the policies, the practices, and the procedures, and the decision-making processes. I think a gentleman down here said that. So part of it is triangulating the data so that what you have to make decisions based on is both reliable and valid. We all have bias, we're human. And so as a result of being human, we bring an implicit bias into the space. I'm cisgender, I'm heterosexual, I identify as indigenous, but I have a lot of white privilege in terms of where I was raised. And so examining those biases and listening to multiple perspectives based on race, gender, sexual orientation, and class is so critical. If you don't do that on the front end, you get down a path and in a couple years, you spin your wheels. And many schools and districts and education systems get into that position. If you have the right data and you analyze that data from multiple perspectives, the chances that you get to a plan, a mission, vision, values, goals, and then within that, a strategic implementation plan that's inclusive of objectives, strategies, formative and summative assessment, and then evaluation. You have to do that for 4 years. I say that because the first year is year zero. That's collecting the data, just getting an idea of where you're at, right? It's like building a house. You got to take a look at the land and survey it. Once you get to year 3, year 4, then you can start to describe a trend. But what happens in a lot of educational systems, schools included, prisons, all over the place, any institution, is that they only go for a couple of years and then they switch the curriculum. Or they only go for a couple of years and Mr. Peterson leaves as the AP and goes over to St. Paul, right? Or they only do this for a couple of years. There are a few districts, Hopkins is one, okay? St. Louis Park is another. The leadership that they have is leadership that is committed to the intentionality of sticking with the plan. And when something doesn't work, they get rid of it and they bring in something that has a better chance of working. At the tail end, you have to have resources to evaluate the efficacy of the implementation of whatever it is you're trying to do differently. And so piecing all that together is a lot of work, but it's the work that needs to go into dismantling 400 years of oppression in this hemisphere, right? When we look at indigenous experiences and the genocide that happened after Columbus, or whether we look at the Middle Passage and bringing over of African enslaved peoples, and all of the negative consequences of those things happened intentionally. And so we need to be intentional about how we think about breaking those things down and building something better. And that's really, I think, in my mind, what MNEEP is about. Race equity and excellence in education.
Fantastic, very well said. What are some academic achievement gaps that exist between groups of students, and what are some trends you're noticing?
I respectfully reject the term academic gap. I call it an opportunity gap because it is the lack of opportunity for certain communities of color, for scholars who do not have the opportunity of their more privileged friends. And so if in fact a scholar comes to us in kindergarten and have had the privilege of being in a preschool, and another scholar of poverty or of color may not have, the opportunity is not equal. And so then we label it as an academic gap or achievement gap. And when we do that, we put the onus on the student and not the system. And I refuse to put the onus on the student. And so we really have to look at the opportunities that this country, this state gives young people, give children, gives moms who are having children. What are the opportunities out there so that when her child is able to come to school for the first time, they are starting at the same starting gate as a mother who had the privilege of sending their child to preschool.
This country was built off of institutionalized slavery, okay, and immigration. And I think reckoning with 250 years of slavery, many years of Jim Crow segregation, we're still dealing with segregation now. I think we have to, again, go back to that word of intentionality, think very carefully about what it is we say when we mean something. I don't ascribe to gaps. I ascribe to debts. There are 400 or 500 years worth of debts that are owed to Black, Brown, Indigenous people, women, LGBTQ, people from different ethnic backgrounds, cultures, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm of the opinion that we are here to give what we can. It's like when you tithe. You come to church, not everybody gives the same amount in the offering plate, but you give what you can give. If everybody gave a little bit of what they could give, there would be enough for everyone. But that's not the world that we live in right now. I don't know why that is.
And I think is historically, because we've always used, as you all have said, a deficit model to describe poor them instead of an asset model. I often talk about, when we talk about an asset model, and in getting over this tradition in higher education, in science, when you're comparing different ethnic racial groups or gender, it's always seen through a deficit lens. Something's wrong with them. And white as this is the status that you need to grow. And when I think about my students, and when you empower the students, because they come to us with talents, they come to us with different unique experiences that have proven that they are resilient. What they do understand better than some of us is systems, because they've had to navigate before they come through our doors. And so when we think about that, and with the trend I noticed, when you empower students and help them understand that they are deserving, that they are worthy, and that they are a part of their own processes and own healing. And what you get is empowered students, empowered scholars who challenge the system. And that's the problem, because most of us who've been in the system a long time are not ready for that challenge, to create a safe space for the people that we purport to serve.
Preach, brother, amen.
And that's why I'm an adjunct at Hamlin and at your state, and was at Oxford also, working with pre-service educators. And the first day that I step into a class, they are called anti-racist educators. Because it's one thing to say that I am not a racist, then you're off the hook. But to say I am an anti-racist means an action. And my action is I will work to dismantle, disrupt, tear down any systems, protocols, or areas that are racist, that are holding people of color and indigenous people down. So as an anti-racist educator, I'm asking you, I'm training you, we are discussing ways that you go into a school now, and when you see a system or protocol that is racist, that is not uplifting your scholars of color, then it's your job to disrupt it. And that's what we have to do within our own personal lives, within our own society, within our own churches, within our own synagogues. We have to do that from the ground up.
Individual, interpersonal, structural, systemic. Racism is the air that we breathe in this country. It's the water we swim in as fish. It's a pervasive experience for all of us. I have to wake up each day because I have lighter skin. I get to choose more than my black friend Heshimar, who is a black man. I have more of a choice to flip the switch on or off. I can choose to be anti-racist. And so I choose to step into the space in that way. It's a mindset, it's a value system, it's a way of being, it's a set of practices that you do every single day as a lighter skinned brother like I am, to choose to be anti-racist. Because I was brought up in a very good family, but I'm not kidding. I was around racist elements, racist influences, racist language, racist behaviors, right? And then you can say the same thing about misogyny, and you can say the same thing about homophobia, and on and on and on. The bottom line is this: we are here to do better for each other, to do better by our Creator, and to love one another. If you strip it all away, take the Beatitudes, and let's go. Because that's what it's about, right? And so, amen to the things that have been said.
And that reminds me, Gandhi said that everyone believed, and we're all family here, so I can say this. Everyone believed that Jesus came for love, compassion, and community, except the Christians. And give that some thought. Give that some thought.
Panelists, can I interrupt for just a second? I want to make sure everybody online can hear all of your wisdom. So when you speak, if you wouldn't mind keeping your mic up next to your mouth, that would help us get capture everything for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And what are some of the retention rates that you notice with teachers and administrators of color across your organization? And how are you diversifying your staff from a talent acquisition standpoint?
Well, I think it's been spoken to here. We're talking about the system that doesn't do right by our Black, Brown, Indigenous students. We're talking about how those students don't see themselves in their education time, right? I went through K through 12, and I grew up in Milwaukee and didn't have a Black teacher until 11th grade, right? Why would I then, as a young person, be like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go to college, I'm gonna go to a predominantly white institution, become an educator, and go back into the places that cause me so much harm. That's why people say that there's a shortage of teachers of color. It's because we don't do right by our folks. We don't do right by our people of color in our system. So we don't have as many as we would like, but that's because it's a systemic issue. Those that we do have, we hear regularly of the microaggressions that they're experiencing from their colleagues, that they have more in common with the students in which they serve than with their staff members. And there are sometimes, and our system does this regularly, they're gonna put one Black person over there, one Black person over there, an Indigenous person over there, so that there can't be a collective support and community. And so we've been working really, really hard at providing spaces for, we call them affinity spaces, for our educators of color, so that they have spaces to be able to go to talk about their experiences and to create that collective power, and be able to bring forth to our senior leadership in the district their recommendations. We are working on some grow your own programs, particularly through our special education program. So those that are serving as special education kind of support folks that can enter into the program through Minneapolis Public Schools and become a licensed special education teacher, because that's one of the greatest needs we have. But we also need more BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color staff with our general ed students, not just with our special ed students. And that's a hard one, and it's not because there aren't enough BIPOC folks in our country to do it. It's because we don't create the spaces systemically. It was created and designed this way for folks to go through that. And those of us that did go through the system, which is like all of us here, that did go through that system, and then we're like, hey, I'm gonna go back there. It's not easy. And there's been a lot of hard things to go through, but when you know at your core that what we need to do is dismantle the system and change it, like sometimes you just can't help but throw yourself in there, and lots of therapy.
And I must say that I am an advocate of having teachers of color that reflect the students, but in full disclosure, I have to say I am from Harlem, New York, and I went to a Catholic grade school in Harlem, New York. There were over 650 of us, all Black students, and we had white Irish nuns who came, their order was founded specifically to teach American Indian and colored children, as we were called then. As a matter of fact, Xavier University in New Orleans, Catherine Drexel, the founder of their order, founded Xavier University. Because she founded Xavier Prep first for her Black girls. And when she found out that white universities were not accepting her Black girls, she founded Xavier University. And she had to give a white man the money to buy the land because they wouldn't sell her the land because she was building a school for the N kids. And then she brought it back from him for $1. So she went to Ireland and recruited young girls to join her order. And these white Irish women came to Harlem, and they had 5 Catholic schools in Harlem. And they came with an inordinate amount of cultural diversity before it became a household term. They had the highest respect for us. They knew how to build relationships with us. And quite honestly, they built such a relationship, I thought I wanted to become a nun when I was in 3rd grade. Until one of my friends said, dude, you can't become one of them. But they had high expectations for us. And these white Irish nuns were incredibly gifted in teaching and building community. And the climate of our school, to this day, we are still friends and get together every other year for reunions. And the topic of conversation are these nuns. And I say that to say, do we have enough teachers of color in our schools? No. But we have white teachers that are in our schools. And I tell my teachers all the time, you can't teach who you do not love. You cannot teach who you do not love. And how do you build relationships with your scholars? Because these nuns built such relationships with us. We did anything that they asked us to do to succeed. And many of us to this day are who we are because of what these white Irish sisters told us that we could do, despite what America was telling us. Because remember, America was telling us that we were 2/5 human. These sisters said, don't you dare believe that. Don't you dare let white America tell you who you are. This is who you are. And they instilled that in us. And Catherine Drexel is my shero to this day because she built schools for colored and American Indian children when no one else would educate us. And so it's a matter of loving who you teach, respecting who you teach, building relationships with who you teach.
Fantastic. Very, very powerful. How ready and equipped do you feel teachers and administrators and staff are to address diversity and inclusion? And what strategies, from a learning and development standpoint, do you focus on in terms of facilitation and training?
I do think it's about accountability, and just like was said earlier, most of the time we want to look at interviews and think about potential or what have they done in the past work. I'm one of those people that look at potential. Is there sincerity there and real passion about doing the work? I work at a school, North Hennepin, that's now 54% students of color. Brooklyn Park now is majority people of color. The community hasn't come hasn't come in their equity journey as far as the school has come with the diversity that we represent. So we make sure that not only who we hire lives up to the mission and the expectation and know and understand who they are serving, but also make sure we hold accountable those who are delivering instructions, those who are delivering service, because we believe in a holistic approach that is responsive to the students that we serve. So there's a number of different things, from professional development plans to our employee evaluation that I do not wait till the end of the year to do. And how do we deal with situations? How do we create opportunities for development and growth? And also, how do we create and help develop individuals to make informed decisions, whether this is the work that they're really to invest in, or this is not the work for them. And we have to be serious and courageous to move on that work, especially when everything is being so politicized in this country. And I always ask the question in interviews, who are we trying to make this space safe for? Please respond.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle on this. And so I think when you're really truly doing this work, whether you call it equity work or justice work, anti-racist work, you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to do today to get the job done? And you have to be willing to accept rejection from people that you love, family, friends, people you've known 40 years. I've had to say goodbye to relationships with people I've known 30, 40 years because they are not on the same path that I'm on. It's not my place to judge another colleague or a teacher. But I stand for justice today because I know it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do by people, and it's what the Most High wants me to do. And so if that means rejection, so be it. And I would be willing to bet every single person on this panel at some level has gone through that rejection process by people they care very deeply about and people that care very deeply about them. I will say this though, once you get through that, and it's hard, most of y'all are white, right? So you're talking about getting rejected by people who look like you, who may dress like you, who talk like you, who come from the same town as you. But once you get past that, you have nothing to lose and nothing to fear. You got to approach it from a perspective of faith.
Something that we're doing in Minneapolis public schools now, and it's through Kristen's leadership, is to address some of what you were mentioning around like your evaluation systems, right? So there are these structures that we use, or we purportedly use, to measure the success or degree to which a teacher is proficient. But the vast majority of those systems at this point in our institution are just really to like continue doing what we've always done, right? Are you planning your lessons effectively? Check, check, right? There's like a cursory mention of equity in this long series of expectations that teachers are expected to be evaluated on. But what Kristen's team is doing this year is building what's a set of equity competencies that are then to be baked into our teacher evaluation system and our principal evaluation system, such that if we actually truly hold equity and inclusion and anti-racism as values as an institution, the things, so like you mentioned, our accountability structures, right, have to hold those values inside of them, or we're not really putting our money where our mouth is. So I'm grateful to work with somebody like Kristen who's leading that work.
I'll also add that I feel like our students today, the word accountability comes up more from our students than anybody else, and they are not standing for mediocrity. You know, they want us as administrators to make a decision and be clear around how we're supporting them. As a athletic director, you know, I can't just look at those conversations that are happening on the other side of campus and like, that's the other side of campus. That doesn't have anything to do with us. It has everything to do with us. So we in our past, you know, something happens on your campus, something happens in your classroom. First thing we do is we run out and we bring somebody in. Got to go find a consultant. Nothing against consultants, right? But we go find a consultant who could talk, or a speaker, and then you think it's over and done with. But it's not, you know, it's underneath, it's bubbling up, and it comes to a head again at some point. So we brought in a strategy firm to help us as coaches have those same conversations that are happening across campus, in our locker rooms, on the practice fields. We've had several days in the past 2 years where we just said, coaches, we know this happened. Your job today is to address this with your team. And that may mean you talk about it for 15 minutes and you move on to practice, or you don't practice today, and this is the conversation for today. So we have to equip our staff with the skill set to have these conversations and not run from it and say, oh, the administration will handle this. So it's interesting. 2 days ago, we all, you know, found out that there was an acquittal in Kenosha. And we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion team within my athletic staff, and the director emailed me right away and said, people may not know this, but I'm sure our students will be talking about this. And I'm like, wow, we're talking about addressing this before institutionally we were talking about addressing this. And it made me proud that you can actually build your own structures, right? So that when something happens, we're not scrambling anymore. We're on top of it and know that this conversation that is impacting our world is likely impacting our student athletes. And because we are going to be held accountable, and we are accountable, we're taking care of somebody's kids, you know? They're ours. They are our kids now. And so we can't run from the hard ones. We have to run right to them.
Fantastic. And lastly, before we wrap it up for questions for the audience, what are some ways the general public can support your organization's diversity and inclusion strategy, and ways they can educate themselves on diversity and inclusion?
I can go real quick. Dr. Glenn Singleton and the Pacific Education Group have 4 agreements. Here's what they are. I commit to staying engaged when talking about race and equity, and gender, sexual orientation equity. I commit to experiencing some discomfort, right? If there's no discomfort, you're not doing the work, and I'm not doing the work. Now, are we talking over the top, shut down discomfort? No. Are we talking blame and shame and make people feel guilty and cry? Absolutely not. But you have to feel some discomfort in the conversation, otherwise you just stay where you're at. 3, accepting and expecting some non-closure. We will not solve the problem of systemic and individualized racism in this conversation today, but we have to stay engaged. And number 4, speak your truth. If I speak my truth and pastor speaks his truth, then we know where we're close and where we're not, and we can meet in the middle. But don't speak for me, and I won't speak for you. Speak your truth, and stand on your principles, and we may disagree on some things when we talk about race, but at least we'll know where we stand.
And also remember, allyship is not you agree 100% on something, but allyship does require participation, and it does require support even when you don't understand it. It's great to have conversations like this, but what do you do with it? How do you measure your own equity journey and how you want to move forward? One of the things that North Hennepin has started to do with our community is to start having healing, racial healing circles, not only internally, but with our communities as a broad way to move step forward. Because if we're going to retain faculty and staff of color, help with student success, community plays such an important role. But we can make a safe environment in our buildings, but what happens when they go out into the community?
And I just challenge each of us, and especially my friends who came this morning. Family gatherings can be very tense at best. And I would be willing to say that many of you have very different views as many in your families. And I would challenge you to not shy away from those conversations, to engage family members in those conversations, and to challenge some perspectives that may be racist, sexist, and just to challenge our families. And there are parties that I've been invited to leave. That's okay. I had my drink and my food. I was ready to leave anyhow. So, because I challenged people in their paradigms of race, I challenged people. And so, as you start your family gatherings, don't let a racist joke go by and everyone nervously laugh at it. Not under your roof. Not under your roof. Don't let conversations that are putting groups of people down, marginalized groups of people. And you know what I mean. Don't let those conversations go. Challenge those conversations. Challenge the family member who may be very much out there on a limb. Because if you don't challenge them, they will continue that conversation, and that conversation gets more nasty, and that conversation divides.
Set the expectation right away. Hate is not welcome in my home. If you were to come to my home, you would see a floor mat that says, hate is not welcome here. We believe in love. We accept difference. We seek out difference. We love difference. Because ultimately, that's what makes us who we are. It makes us human. Right? And so, yeah, don't let that stuff slide. I was on the receiving end of some racist behavior from an uncle-in-law on my wife's side of the family this summer. It was traumatic. 3 days I had to listen to that. And finally I stood up to him and I said, enough is enough. All the white folks in my family chose to not say anything about it, including my wife. And then when I said something, everyone turned on me and blamed it on me. And as a result of that, we came up with 7 agreements as a family. My wife and I came to agreement. My wife and our children came to agreement. And then we put it up to her parents and the rest of the family. We said, listen, this is how we're going to operate moving forward. These are the parameters and the guardrails. We don't have to agree every time, but goodness gracious, we're going to treat each other with the respect that we deserve as human beings. And everyone signed on. Now everyone knows what the expectations are. So if someone comes into my home over Thanksgiving or over the holidays and says a racist comment, or says a misogynistic joke, or does a ha-ha about LGBTQIA+ folks, I will ask them to leave. And if it's my own father, I will ask him to leave if he doesn't stop. And that's what it takes. That's what Stanley's talking about. That's what we're talking about.
And I literally have invited people out of my home.
Yep.
I know you will not speak like that in my home. You can do it someplace else, but you're not going to do it here. Because that hatred and that venom gets into your in your couch, gets into your chairs, gets into your pots, gets into everything in your home. And I'm not having it. Not having it. I've gotten a coat and whatever else you brought, and there's the door, but not in my home.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I was going to add I think a lot about policy in sort of my response to this question, and in terms of what actions, citizen that lives in we all live in an area that there is a school district, right? Whether or not you have children in it or not. And one of the things that often, and I don't know if it's across every system, is negatively impacting our ability to recruit, retain staff of color, right? Like folks who look like the students we serve, it's baked into the teacher contract. So I would just offer, seek to understand what structures are holding folks out of the systems that you live in, and then you can speak up at a board meeting, right? You can gather a group of parents who are like-minded and go together and make a statement in public comment around why you believe that this structure is not working for our students of color and Indigenous students. So we are in Minneapolis in a place where we're actually, this past year, we had a celebration. We can celebrate that we retained our teachers of color, not our central office administrators of color. Our teachers of color were retained at the same rate of their white colleagues, but that is only because we have all of this additional money related to the American Rescue Plan. Right, so at the end of 2.5 years of having a lot of additional money, a lot of school systems are going to find themselves cutting their last hired teachers. That is baked into almost every teacher contract system-wide, right? And that, in most cases, is the largest portion of your staff of color. We cannot have that happen in 2.5 years. So if there's one thing that we could try to fight for over these years where we have additional funding in our systems, it's to change those structures that are in contract language that will just excuse the mass layoffs of folks of color.
And just jumping on that so we can get going. Who is on your school board? Who are your elected officials and your local elected officials is important. And that is a big place at which you all have say. It might not be Minneapolis, it might not be Hopkins, it might be, but that is a place where those elected positions are very, very important. And making sure that you are involved in that process and organizing in that way is what we need for more accountability to these systems.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. This was very powerful, informative, and constructive. A big round of applause for our panelists here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And Pastor Scott, I'll let you take it over here.
Thank you all so very much. We are so grateful for you being here with us today, and I'm sure folks will have just a minute or two here to come up and say thank you again. Thank you to Justice, thank you to Joe and David for their time with us this morning. Go in peace, love and serve the Lord. Thank you.
Thank you.